ordinary crowds. They greeted him like a pop star. He was a cultural icon. People, coming from miles away and spending the nights in their cars to make sure they got a good position at a baseball stadium or wherever he was. And he packed every venue. And he would, again, tell them what they didn't want to hear. He was not happy about the American church's position on contraception, on abortion, on women in the priesthood, all of the hot-button social items that a predominant number of Roman Catholics in America support. And on the flight over, I recall telling him, "You will risk the danger of not being listened to." And he said, "No, no, no." He said, "They'll listen to me because I am the Father, and all good fathers must tell the truth. If your children stray, it doesn't mean you stop loving them. I will continue to love them, and I will continue to tell them what I believe is the truth." And it was very difficult to come up with a follow-up question for a man who was so humble and held such an extraordinary position. This Pope's impact was never immediate in terms of consequences, but always in the aftermath of his visits, you would get the reverberations of his visit.
Pope John Paul II was famous for his media smarts, becoming the first pope in history to crack open the doors of the Vatican to the media. NBC's Keith Miller tells us what he learned as one of the insiders reporting on the Vatican.
I'm Keith Miller, the senior foreign correspondent for NBC News, based in London now. I was based in Rome as the Vatican correspondent and bureau chief for the news bureau there from 1980 to 86. I was the first NBC correspondent to regularly cover a pope. Not that many people had had that much experience covering popes and the Vatican. This was, again, a bureaucracy that had survived for 2,000 years without being accountable to anybody but God. Doors closed much faster in the Vatican than they opened. When popes used to die in the old days, you would never know that they were ill. You would just be told that John the 23rd's not well today, which basically meant that he was dead. It was an institution which was not used to the media glare that this Pope brought with him. So in a sense, everybody who started covering the Pope at that time and the Vatican was discovering for the first time not just this institution, but the papacy itself. In the beginning, there wasn't that much coverage. But when you called into New York and said, there's 1 million people here, and they're all shouting for this guy, and it's like the New York desk would say, 1 million people, you got pictures? Yeah, we have pictures. Let's put them on TV. And then it started to snowball.
Nightly news stand-up close going in 3, 2, 1. The Pope's strong endorsement of social activism on the part of...
At one point, NBC had about 7 or 8 people covering the Pope, along with myself, producers, crews, who were all accredited to the Vatican. And within National Broadcasting Company, we were known as the God Squad, because we were dealing so often with the Catholic Church, the Vatican, and this Pope. We arrived in Ghana. We had a great reception at the airport. We had great pictures of the Pope getting off the plane and dancing with the faithful. And he ended up just mingling with the crowds all by himself. We grabbed the video cassettes, went off to the TV station to feed these pictures to New York, to find the control room infested with chickens and roosters. And there wasn't a single wire or plug or playback machine. And so those pictures were never seen. When we first took off, we were leaving in 727 with 35 journalists and a couple of bishops, 4 or 5 security guys, and maybe a physician. And off we'd go. It was really a lot of fun because you actually felt you were on some sort of mystical mystery tour and had no idea what to expect or really what even he was going to say. And one of the last trips I took with him, it was with a 747 with 150 journalists and probably 60 members of the Vatican, bishops, liaison officers, communications officers, the Pope's doctors, several of them, and a large security detail.
This is an NBC News special report. Shooting at the Vatican. Here's NBC News correspondent John Chancellor.
Good evening. Pope John Paul II is in the emergency care unit tonight.
I think like everybody else in the world, we were stunned. We couldn't imagine why anybody would want to assassinate the Pope. It was very easy to get to the Pope because there was no security. You know, he was driving around in the Pope-mobile, and he had several Swiss guards alongside the Pope-mobile. But there was no security in the crowds or along the route through St. Peter's Square. There was never any feeling that there was a need to protect the Pope completely, in the sense of keeping him in a bubble as the President of the United States is, or the Prime Minister of Britain. So it was a shock. I believe that the assassination attempt changed him both physically and psychologically. It's not a very good thing to have a bullet enter and exit your body. I think it aged him. I think he became more philosophical and more mystical. And the rapidity of granting sainthood accelerated. His time alone in his chapel increased. There were little signs, but not psychologically in the sense if we talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome and fear. He is not a man who has fear or would ever think of being fearful. He believed that Mary, the Madonna, was looking after him, and he was prepared from perhaps the first communion that he ever took to leave this earth. Security around the Pope changed enormously after that attack, for obvious reasons, that if there was one, there could be another.
The Pope's schedule was unchanged despite the firebombing early this morning of the platform where he will celebrate Mass on Sunday. Italian police were put on alert and extra officers brought in to guard the Pope following the incident.
The Pope-mobile that he was so famous for riding around in, it was then encapsulated, and then in some countries it was bulletproofed. And your ability to get close to the Pope changed dramatically. He was the sort of man who liked going into the crowds. He wanted to go touch people. He wanted to kiss babies, and he couldn't. I don't think a threat would ever slow this man down. That would no more stop him than the fact that he's got arthritis in the knee, Parkinson's disease, and a failing ability to speak and walk. He still gets on the plane and takes the trip. Perhaps what his legacy will include is his integrity. He's not moved by focus groups. He's not moved by public opinion. He's not a Republican running for president. He's not a Democrat running for governor. He doesn't care. He doesn't need your vote. He needs your soul. He wants to save it because he believes, he knows that the sanctity of life is the meaning of our being here. And he won't relent. His impact beyond the papacy has been unaccounted yet. And I think when it's finally added up, it will turn out to be a magnificent sum.
It was a special edition of the Today Show, One Holy Week in Rome. In 1985, Brian Gumbel and Jane Pauley had rare access to the Pope and his staff. Here's the Today Show at the Vatican.
By way of a preview, we have something, well, very rare for you right now. A short time ago, at a general audience in the Vatican, we received a greeting that we'll share with you now.
Particularly pleased to welcome the group from the American television network, NBC, which will be broadcasting directly to the United States from the Vatican during Holy Week.
This morning we are in the end zone of the ancient Colosseum, where spectacles of a different kind were the order of the day 1900 years ago. With that time reference in mind, we welcome you and greet you in Latin. Though it's April Fool's Day, this is no joke. We're starting a week of broadcasts from Rome today, Monday, April the 1st, 1985.
Early this morning, we paid a visit to the Vatican inside the Pauline Chapel for a Mass that was celebrated by Pope John Paul II.
Dear brothers and sisters, we have entered Holy Week, and our thoughts turn to our Lord Jesus Christ. We actually celebrate his life and share in his victory. The saving power of his death and resurrection enters our lives. Families, families. Thank you. The children.
God bless.
God bless.
God bless you.
You're from Philadelphia, Virginia.
Holy Father, on behalf of NBC News.
Ah, well, from Warsaw.
From Warsaw.
From Warsaw?
From Warsaw.
You brought that from Warsaw?
We brought it from Warsaw, NBC News.
And your Holy Father. For the Monsignor of Reds and for the Papa. Yeah.
So. Thank you. Best wishes for your trip, for your activity during the Holy Week.
Your Holiness, you do us great honor.
Your children.
Happy Easter, Your Holiness.
Happy Easter.
It was emotional, wasn't it?
We represented many, many faiths, and we were universally moved by that
I
experience.
thought I was rubbing your back for your support. I realized only at the end that it was for mine, actually.
È mercoledì e sono le 8:30, metà del nostro soggiorno a Roma è già volato e ce la stiamo godendo un mondo. Parola di Jane Paoli e Brian Gamble. Ci troviamo sulla scalinata di Trinità dei Monti che domina Piazza di Spagna e i suoi favolosi negozi, che noi conosciamo ormai come le nostre tasche, non è vero Jane? Ci siamo di casa,
Con tutti i soldi che
no?
ci abbiamo speso.
Certo che li abbiamo spesi, ma è stato molto piacevole.
Sì, è sorprendente, anche se lo sapevamo già. Quanto conviene fare lo shopping?
Not being listened to. And he said, no, no, no. He said, they'll listen to me because I am the father, and all good fathers must tell the truth. If your children stray, it doesn't mean you stop loving them. I will continue to love them, and I will continue to tell them what I believe is the truth. And it was very difficult to come up with a follow-up question. Ordinary crowds, they greeted him like a pop star. He was a cultural icon. People, coming from miles away and spending the nights in their cars to make sure they got a good position at a baseball stadium or wherever he was. And he packed every venue. And he would, again...
Pope John Paul II was famous for his media smarts, becoming the first pope in history to crack open the doors of the Vatican to the media. NBC's Keith Miller tells us what he learned as one of the insiders reporting on the Vatican.
I tell them what they didn't want to hear. He was not happy about the American Church's position on contraception, on abortion, on women in the priesthood, all of the hot-button social items that a predominant number of Roman Catholics in America support. And on the flight over, I recall telling him, you will risk the danger of for a man who was so humble and held such an extraordinary position. This Pope's impact was never immediate in terms of consequences, but always in the aftermath of his visits, you would get the reverberations of his visit.